Well, thank you once again, everybody, for tuning into the Satisfactionist Podcast. I am going to waste no more time in getting to our special guest, part 2 of our interview with Matthew A. Gilbert, who's going to give us some insights on his career, his adventures, and what ultimately took him to the wonderful place of Dubai. And actually, this is kind of a neat little inside baseball here. So Matt and I have actually been talking post this interview because I really enjoyed talking with him and shared a lot of really cool stuff. And I think Matt and I are going to be collaborating on some stuff as we move ahead. So I think we may be hearing more from Mr. Gilbert, Professor Gilbert, or as his students refer to him, Dr. Gilbert, down the road. And we will definitely be looking forward to that. So I thank you all once again for tuning in and checking out the Satisfactionist Podcast. Please feel free to drop by our page, support us, share the love, check out a link, and with no further ado, here is Mr. Matthew A. Gilbert. So this episode picks up right where we left off previously as we start getting into the gig economy and really what academics need to go through in order to apply and get accepted into some of these wonderful teaching jobs. Today, they talk often about the gig economy, and the gig economy just being the fact that and we're there already. People don't just have a job anymore. And I think, and not to, look, I'll put it this way. If that works out for you and you got one place to go and only one thing to do, and then you stop that and then you go and enjoy life, and quite honestly, in certain regards, I'm a little envious of people who can do that. But the reality is that folks need to get used to, I think, a little bit of the path that you've taken, and the path that many of those who I will speak to throughout the context of the show have taken, which is, yes, we're doing this thing, but we got 4 or 5 other things in the hopper, and you're constantly building your skill, constantly building your knowledge, constantly building your expertise, because you want to open up doors to that next, you want to, in the video game realm, you want to level up, right? So, you're trying to do this to get to the next level, and not because you want to be a slave to the industry, but you know what? When you're in the gig economy, you're doing what you love, and you're able to express your abilities in so many different ways. And I think for me, teaching, consulting, learning, working, in a professional environment, all of that kind of feeds what I love doing.
Yeah, me too.
And so how do you get to this opportunity in Dubai? Because you spent, you got into teaching, from there it's a lot of, different schools, different campuses, and folks, by the way, just so you know, and Matthew, I don't know if this is your experience as well, but there's about 100-to-1 ratio on applying for schools to teach at, meaning that it's going to take you about 100 applications for every one response you get back from a school that may or may not be interested in you. And then you still got to go through the whole interview and vetting out process and everything else. So you're a writer, man. You've taught at a lot of schools. I imagine you've sent off more than a few resumes.
Yeah, well, it's funny, actually, by coincidence, today, this date that you and I are talking, June 18th, is the 9th anniversary of the very first day of the very first academic course that I ever taught. And
by the way, it is also a palindrome.
Yeah. It is. No. It's not actually. The 16th was. But no, today is. Yeah, the full year. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, the whole week up to today has been. I
saw that actually. I did see that somewhere. Somebody posted that on Facebook, and it was something like, "Here you go, nerds," and it was like, "You're right." The full date is you're right. So I was just remembering. Basically, I'm in the midst of a blog post, and I was doing some numbers. I was trying to sort of figure out, quantify some of my experience. And so what happened with me, as a quick aside, so 9 years ago today was the first day of the very first academic class that I ever taught. And it was an online class for University of Phoenix, but it was for what was then called Axia College of University of Phoenix.
Yep.
And it was then, and it still is now, but it's just folded underneath University of Phoenix. It's basically their online junior college. So the very first course that I taught was called COM 120, and it was called Effective Persuasive Writing. So a lot of the courses that I taught at University of Phoenix, and actually a good number of those that I taught at the Vry campus in Bakersfield, were actually writing courses or English courses. And I was able to teach those courses for the associate's level because I had a bachelor's in English. My master's is, of course, in business, so I can teach undergraduate students or bachelor students with that master's degree. But basically, so I had also, prior to this first academic experience, I actually started teaching, if you want to call it that, by teaching traffic school courses for the preceding September. And this is another thing that I found on Craigslist, and partly why I wanted to teach traffic school was because I was concerned, or I wasn't sure what kind of classroom management skills I had, because it's one thing to be a student in a class. It's another thing to be the teacher in a class.
Yes.
And I thought, if I can get some experience teaching in traffic school, it'll be like pitching in the minor leagues, right? So teaching at traffic school is like pitching in the minor leagues, because if you throw a few wild pitches, nobody really cares and nobody's really watching, and I don't know. And I figured, people go to traffic school expecting the worst. So the bar is set very low. So even if I were to fail miserably, nobody would probably notice.
Hide behind the bureaucracy.
Right. Again, everybody's just prepared to be miserable for 8 hours. So, I used to joke that it's my goal to make this mildly entertaining and reasonably painless. And that was always the motto I would say at the start of every class. And I actually wound up having a lot of fun teaching traffic school, and it gave me a lot of good experience managing a classroom. I had students everywhere from 16 to I think I had one woman who was 85 or 86. She was my oldest student. And you're managing time, you're managing people, you're managing curriculum. You're trying to find ways to deliver an approved curriculum, but in a way that's contextual and somewhat adapted to the students you have at the time and maybe where you are. And so it was a really good experience. And for anyone who's actually looking to get into teaching, it's not going to qualify as really academic experience, but it will give you the confidence and the clarity that you might be lacking or might think you're lacking before you get into an actual academic setting. So it really, I think, primed the pump for me, and it really gave me some experience before it really mattered, I guess you could say. So that was in September 2nd of 2006. But June 18th of 2007 was that first academic experience. So between then and Dubai, basically, I just counted this today. I have taught at a total of 16 universities or colleges, taught at or for. This is a combination of online classes or on campus. Let's see, what else was there? I've developed 21 courses, and a lot of those are courses that I've taught. And in many cases, at many of the universities that I taught for, I would develop the curriculum or work from a sort of skeleton syllabus and then add to it, change it, enhance it, or update it. But in a few cases, I was specifically hired to develop a curriculum for a course that I never taught. So that's how I really started getting into and understanding curriculum design and course development. And then in total, I have taught 70 different courses across those 16 universities. So within those 70 courses, many of those I've taught many times in many different sections. Right. So in terms of actual courses by course number at the various universities, it's 70 courses that I've taught, but many more sections of each of those courses. So I used to keep better track of this, but I've pretty much estimated that I probably teach in a given year between 300 and 500 students. Is probably just how it works out. In the fall and spring of this year at my university here in Dubai, I taught somewhere between 180 and 200 students every semester. So I have taught a lot of students by my rough calculations. And again, I told you I'm really bad at math, so I probably forgot to carry the one or put the decimal in the wrong place. But my estimate is I've probably taught somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 students by this point.
Wow. That's a small community of people.
It is, it's almost an aircraft carrier, like, and so to me, that is tremendously rewarding. It's great knowing I've learned with and from that many students. Not every class has been the best class ever. I haven't, I've always strive to learn and to improve, and that's what I enjoy about teaching. It's an opportunity for me to learn new things, to learn about myself, to improve my craft, and to learn from my students. I always try to say that I like to join them on a learning journey.
Oh yeah.
And because
and I get that too, because one of the things I say is that it doesn't necessarily matter the level, because I learn every time that I teach, which is kind of part of the fun, really.
It really is. Even at an associate's level, or even if it's a course I've taught many times before, it's always different, right? The students are always different. There's always something new and different you can do. I tend to use a lot of templates that I create, a lot of forms. Again, that traces right back to that very first job I had out of college. So if I were to show you a lot of what I use at my university, I do worksheets for in-class assignments, and they all kind of are derivative of the same design, but all of that stuff I make in Word, and it's tables and columns, and I try to make them interactive in a two-dimensional way, where basically I give them in-class exercises, have them work in groups, have them work individually, and even just these simple pieces of paper that for me they're not effortless to create. They take some thought to conceptualize, but they're pretty straightforward for me, but nevertheless, they still take some time and thought. Even those, I'm always improving. Like I'm not a big fan of rubrics, but for certain things I make templates for that. And every now and then I'll realize it's a little off or it doesn't fully capture it. So I'm always looking for ways to improve the tools that I use, to improve my delivery, to sort of enhance how I do something. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about teaching the most.
Yeah, it's interesting because you say you're not a fan of rubrics. I think that there is a little bit of folks on both sides of the fence. I use rubrics a lot, but I understand why you say you're not a fan too. For me, it makes the overall, like, how did you get to the score, better. It makes it easier for me to communicate that. However, one of the things I also do is I read through papers and I comment on them, and I call things out, and I ask, do the kind of Socratic, how would you have made this better, or how might you have better positioned this statement?
Yeah.
So, I feel like you have to have a combination of both. I have had professors that just use a rubric straight. I've had professors that just give a grade, and it's either, good job or needs improvement. And it's like, okay, anything else? So it's interesting. I think there's a lot of different approaches to doing it, but that's interesting that, when you have so many assignments and you're in writing and you're really having to kind of read through everything, and you're saying, rubrics aren't so great. I get that, though. I can understand that, given the topics that you explore.
Yeah, it depends on the course. It depends on the assignment. It depends on the student sometimes. In many cases, I've gotten to the point where I use the equivalent of like a baker knows what a pinch of something is, right?
Yeah.
Or a CHP knows what, 67 miles an hour looks like. You know what I mean? Like, I can look at a paper and probably within some really high degree of certainty tell you, at the very least, is this an A, B, or C paper? And then I can look at And then I'll look at it more thoroughly to get the finesse, the finer points. But I guess I should say, like, I aspire to use more rubrics, but I'm sort of in between, sort of a little bit more, I guess you could say, being educationally improvisational and more educationally formal, I suppose you could say. Because my concern, my hesitancy with rubrics is that sometimes students can obsess on them, and then they say, well, I did A, B, and C, I should get an A.
Yeah.
Like they can get very literal about it sometimes.
It becomes formulaic to them.
Yeah. So sometimes it's counterintuitive to my sort of more intuitive grading process. But as a student, I also know, like you mentioned, it's really hard when you get this mysterious grade and you don't really know why, and it's going to be hard to articulate, So I think I aspire to use rubrics more, but maybe in a way that isn't directly tied to points. It's maybe more of a guide, this is what I'm looking for. So in certain assignments, like I'm giving my students now a presentation, and so I show them, I have a rubric that I use to grade with it, and it's specific yet vague. Like it has categories of criteria, but then for each one, I have a Likert scale, or I do in terms of did they achieve this goal, very well, neutral, not well, not very well. And I don't assign a point to it, right? So I still have evidence of assessment, but then the actual point total is not tied to those specific components of the rubric. And for me, that works better because then they don't get they can't kind of make kind of like a lawyer kind of an argument about, well, these points should add up to this,
Yeah, well, they can. But
but without my putting points on the actual items,
it
gives me a little more wiggle room.
Yeah, what I'm saying though is that, and it's so true. I mean, students will always kind of come back and argue a point, and it's fine. I mean, I don't have a huge ego when I'm teaching. If they make a good solid case and they're right and I was wrong, I'll just say, good job. I was wrong. Yeah, thanks for identifying that. But it's one of the things too that I kind of have in there is that everyone has a voice, but I have the final say. So I will definitely hear you out. But at the end of the day, if I really don't feel like it was where it needs to be, then, it is what it is. And you just kind of have to roll forward because you know what? There is this. I know that you want life to be fair in every corner of the world and every corner of life, but it just isn't always. And sometimes you're just going to have to roll with something you don't like.
Yeah. And I should say, too, that I'm probably more flexible than most, or I'm probably more on the flexible and negotiable side of things.
Yeah.
But like you said, but within reason.
Within reason.
And I try to be very accommodating to my students. I've more or less mainly taught working adults, so I try to be very aware of and respectful of the fact that they have lives going on outside of school.
Sure.
And I know that life happens, I know a lot of things happen beyond their control. I've always been very open to working with my students, to sort of understanding their situation. I kind of have like a bend it, don't break it kind of mentality when it comes to that. But if people start overusing that privilege, or it becomes evident that they're taking advantage of it, then that's a different story. But I typically try to work with my students and give them the benefit of the doubt. And again, somewhere between firm and flexible is usually where I try to be from a grading and assessment standpoint. But that's the biggest challenge to me in teaching. It's the grading. Everything else I love. The grading gives me the biggest headaches because I wish almost everything could just be pass, no pass.
So I got a question for you here. This week, it's going to get to 105 degrees in Bakersfield. Yeah. How is that different than Dubai?
Well, today was 102 degrees here. So it's not that different heat-wise from a numerical standpoint. The main difference here, and it fortunately hasn't been too blazing hot here yet. Now, blazing hot is a relative term, but the humidity here is a bigger factor. There's humidity here. And the temperature seems to really peak in like mid-July to August, and that's when it gets really hot. And the humidity, again, it's such a cliche, but the humidity does make a huge difference.
I lived in the South. I totally understand that.
Yeah, you get humidity more than I actually did before coming here. So the humidity is the main factor here, and but in some respects, I mean, I remember being in the San Fernando Valley once, and it was 119 degrees.
Yeah,
that was kind of an anomaly, but it's not that far out of reach, and that's about how hot it gets here. But it stays that way here for several days.
Yeah. So what's the experience been like? And then how did you get there? I mean, was it another instance of your Googling and looking at an opportunity? What brought you there, and how has it been? I mean, what have you had to do differently? How is it different academically or even socially, culturally?
Sure. Well, the opportunity kind of came about in part, I don't want to say by accident. It was sort of the idea for it originated from something that was brought to my attention from one of the universities that I am an online adjunct for, and that's UCLA Extension. So what initially happened is a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago at this point, I can't remember exactly, UCLA Extension is really innovative, and they're always looking for ways to customize their product and make it available to other people or organizations or do different kind of things. And so they sent out an email to their instructors who teach online and on campus for UCLA and said, look, we're looking into the possibility of participating in a program by which we send instructors to Saudi Arabia for 30-day cycles. And then, you go there for 30 days, you put you up in a hotel, and you teach whatever your subject matter expertise is, and you come back. Now, I don't know how many times a year you could do this. I don't know. I wasn't sure of all of the details, but that was the basic idea. And then the students who would attend that program there, when they finished the program, they would then come to the U.S. for job placement. That's what my understanding was. And if I remember correctly, UCLA Extension, Harvard, and Yale were all sort of interested in participating in this program. And it seemed like a really great idea, and kind of what mostly sold me on the idea is they said, and we'll pay you $30,000 a month.
It's not bad.
I said, okay, I'm packing my bag right now. Where do I go? Now, in retrospect, I realized from a tax perspective, half of that would have gone to taxes because I wasn't living abroad. But still, I'll still take $15,000 a month. But as is the case in many things, an opportunity arises but then never materializes. So after a lot of back and forth and some sort of my pestering, it didn't really seem to be going anywhere. But what that experience did do is it made me realize that there is a whole world of opportunity outside of the United States. And I had honestly never really thought about teaching overseas. I have two sons. My oldest son is going to be 13 in September, and my youngest son turned 10 in January. And so this is even a few years before that. So they're still young, and they were younger then. They live with their mom, so there is some flexibility in that. But I had never really thought about teaching overseas because, I still have a very close relationship with them. But when I was starting to look at opportunity abroad and then some of the challenges being an adjunct comes with here in the United States, I started weighing options and alternatives. And really, I just started exploring options overseas without really having a clear idea of what I wanted to do or where. But I just kind of started, I don't want to say like carpet bombing applications, but I was pretty much wherever I could find an opportunity overseas that either didn't specify that it needed a PhD or was vague or looked like it could be reasonably matched with my skill set, I applied. So I was applying a lot through LinkedIn. I was using a website called higheredjobs.com.
Yeah.
And I was also using the Chronicle of Higher Ed's Vitae website. And I initially I was just kind of following the rabbit down any hole. Like I didn't really think much of the practicalness of it. So I initially did an interview with a private university in Kabul, Afghanistan, and just kept going with it and thought, well, let me see how long I could go with this, because part of me, I just wanted to have the experience. I'd never interviewed for a full-time position, let alone a full-time position overseas. And so I thought, well, let me just ride this as far as I can and at least just have some experience and for the future, have a reference point. So I was offered this position at a private university in Kabul, Afghanistan, and everybody who I mentioned this to said, how crazy are you? Including a colleague of mine who is friends with a gentleman who used to be in charge of all the special forces in Afghanistan. And my friend said, the special forces can't wait to leave Afghanistan. If they want to get out, why do you want to go in? Like,
very, very compelling way to put it.
But I was kind of like, part of me was a little bit like consciously naive to it. I thought, well, let me just see. I don't know. And then I got curious. I thought, well, the offer was good, but not great. It wasn't like it didn't totally, amaze me, but I thought, well, it's still a full time, and I was trying to weigh the options. And then out of curiosity, I applied to the American University of Afghanistan because I just wanted another perspective. And I got an offer from them. And again, the same people told me I was crazy. I said, yeah, but it pays a little bit better, and it has life insurance. And they say, well, it has life insurance for a reason.
Oh, no.
And again, I even talked to a woman whose from Afghanistan. Her father was from there, and I got a lot of different perspectives. But ultimately, I just didn't want to totally take that big of a risk. But what it did do is, in that process, it gave me some idea of the process. It made me realize that there was opportunity out there. It made me realize that if you look a little bit past your comfort zone, and that was a little bit beyond my comfort zone, but even if it don't look quite as far, there's still opportunity. So I had applied for a position at a university through LinkedIn in June of 2014, and I heard from them about 2 months later, which is, like I said, about a week or 10 days after I drove that woman and her two daughters from Santa Barbara to San Francisco. And I had applied actually for one position there, and they called and they offered me they asked me if I was interested in a slightly different position. I had actually applied for a program director position, but I knew I really wasn't qualified for it because I think it said it wanted a PhD. But I applied anywhere. I didn't really pay too much attention to the limitations. I figured let them tell me that I don't qualify instead of me disqualifying myself before I even try.
Very important that you say that too, because that's one of the things I've learned even in my own pursuits is that a lot of times they put PhD in there, but if you feel like you're a fit, send it anyways.
You never know. Yeah, it's like it's like anything in life. If act like you've been there or act like you deserve to be there, and you run a greater chance of being invited in than if you just automatically say no, I shouldn't be there. Like, why remove yourself from consideration? Let them do it. If they really feel that way. So I had a couple of Skype interviews, and literally I had about, I think it was 10 days to completely shut down my life and move to Dubai for a start that September 9th or 10th, which was incidentally my older son's birthday. And I had actually, for some reason, I thought they wanted me to start at the first of the year, the following year. Like, she meant the school year. So that began an adventure of unexpected dimensions, I suppose you could say, but of also unanticipated reward. So I basically kind of just took that chance, and I realized, for me professionally and for me personally, this is I think an important next step, and it provides me with a certain level of experience and a certain opportunity that I can't really replicate it any other way. I mean, the biggest challenge for me, aside from the practicalities of basically having to sort of shut down my whole life and relocate, and it still is, the issue of not being as physically present with my kids as I had been in the past. And that still is probably the biggest challenge. I mean, what allows me to kind of sleep at night, so to speak, other than just total exhaustion, is the realization that my being here allows me to help them in a more stable way than I was able to when I was only adjuncting. Because for me, I only adjuncted for about 7 years. And intermittently, I would have a few full-time positions here and there, but mainly I was adjuncting. And it's a hustle. And I like that variety. I like that, nothing ever got boring, but it was a hustle and a challenge sometimes. So basically, the first university I was at, I taught at for a fall and spring semester. And then I became aware of an opportunity at the university where I am now. It's the American University in the Emirates. And I had one of my colleagues at my previous university actually had taught at the university I'm at currently, and he suggested I look into it. And basically, I applied and was accepted and sort of was able to get out of my contract from the previous university and move over to where I am now. And I actually started teaching for them last summer as a part-time employee for one class, and then started with them full-time in the fall. So I've basically been full-time with them for one school year. And as of next month, I will have been teaching there for a full year. And basically, I'm staying here over the summer, and they have summer courses. They have 2 summer sessions. So we're currently in the first summer session, and I'm basically still a regular employee. Then for the second summer session, I'm taking my leave, but they allow you to come back and teach basically as an adjunct while you're still getting paid. for being a full-time employee.
Oh, wow.
So so it's kind of a way to earn some additional money, to sort of like save on some expenses, that kind of a thing. And so my biggest expense have been my trips back to the U.S.
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you something. So when you think about like how expensive it is to live here in the Bay Area, and it's kind of expensive. So when you look at like how the contrast of spending is in Dubai, what is that difference between the U.S. and there?
I can really only speak to my experience in L.A. And in the greater Southern California region. I was last living in Carpinteria, actually, up near Santa Barbara, before I relocated to here. And I was in a one-bedroom apartment there. It was about 700 square feet. And now I'm in a studio apartment that's about 500 square feet. And I'm paying about another $150 a month for my studio here than I was my one-bedroom in Carpinteria. Housing is definitely the biggest expense here. But at the same time, too, it's like I'm in a new building. It's in a nice area. Like, there's a lot of new construction here. I don't live in kind of the sort of like, I live slightly, how to explain it? I don't live in the sort of main parts of Dubai. I live sort of a little bit outside of the main area. But I've been in my place for 2 years. I like it. Certain things are expensive, like utilities can be expensive. You pay for your air conditioning separate from everything else. So for me, I pay for my rent, I pay for my water and power, and then I pay separately for my air conditioning expense. And obviously that fluctuates greatly, goes up in the summer and goes down in the winter. And the biggest surprise to me actually living here was the winter is actually really temperate, from about mid-October to about mid-April, give or take, plus or minus a couple of weeks on either end. The weather is awesome. It's like at night it's like 70 degrees, and during the day it's in like the 80s.
Wow, that's not bad.
It's great, and they've been doing a lot of things here to sort of improve the weather. Like everything from everything from cloud seeding to all these other things. And even right now, it's not as hot as I remember it being last year. Now that could change. I think it kicks in a little bit more in another month or so. But that was the biggest surprise. I thought it was like blazing furnace 24/7, 365 days a year, but it's not. Like it's really quite nice in the winter.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, they get a lot of tourists from like Europe during that period too. Like they get a lot of Russian tourists because it's cold in those parts of the world, and they come here because it's warm but not hot.
Right. Well, so let me ask you. So, what about like getting around? I mean, do you own a vehicle there, or are you using like public transportation?
Where I am is not conducive for public transportation. They have a great metro system here. I think it's 5 years old or 7 years old. I can't remember. It's 5 or 7 years old, and it's heavily used. But if you kind of imagine Dubai, it's sort of like it's not a rectangle, but if you sort of imagine it where the west-ish kind of side, it's not exactly west. It's like Dubai's kind of UAE is kind of at like a northeast kind of an angle kind of a thing. But if you imagine the western side of it, the side closest to the ocean, so to speak, that's where the metro is. It goes along that corridor, and that's where a lot of people live in that area. So the metro goes like sort of north-south kind of a thing, and then at one point it goes east-west a little bit. But it doesn't really come to where I live, and it doesn't really go to where my university is. So I can't use the metro, which is a shame because it's a great system. So I've been renting a car for since January of last year. So to get a license here, there are about a half a dozen countries, including the U.S., where you literally just go in, you show them your U.S. driver's license, you pay what I think was about, maybe by the time I was done with it, $150, something like that, and they convert the license to a UAE license. You take an eye test, and that's it. So unlike the DMV in the U.S., I went in, and within 35 minutes, I'd done everything, and I walked out with my license.
Wow.
And it was really efficient. And I've had the license since Christmas Day of 2014, and I've been driving since January 10th of 2015 for the most part. And driving here isn't too bad. It's a little bit like LA. I mean, you really definitely have to be mindful, though. I mean, there's more obstacles. There's people walking on the sides of the road, which is something I'd never experienced in the U.S. There's a lot of trucks. There's a lot of construction going on all the time. So there's a lot of big trucks. There's a lot of different kinds of vehicles. So it's not as crazy, as intimidating as sort of the rumors might have you believe. But that's because maybe I'm coming from Los Angeles, or I learned to drive partially in the city of San Francisco. So to me, it's relative, right?
So
for somebody,
if you've driven in a big city, you've got experience driving in a congested area.
Yeah, and they have a great road system here. I mean, the hardest part with the road system here is there are lots of roundabouts, and sometimes you have to go in a very indirect way to get to a direct place. Just because of the way the roads are constructed. And the roads change quite often. They're always building something or changing something. It's really amazing. But poor Google can't always keep up with it. And sometimes Google sends me on adventures, and I'm kind of trying to figure out what it's thinking. Like, one time Google wanted me to literally drive through the parking garage of the Dubai Mall, go in one end and go out the other. And I thought, wait a minute, this can't be right. Like... So poor Google gets a little confused. What I've noticed is you have to sort of really look at the map. You can't even listen to what it says, or even look at the directions. If it says stay right, well, it might mean stay in the right-hand lane or take a right-hand turn. It's never totally clear. So you have to really look at the map on the GPS, and really sometimes you have to intuit where you're going to go. But by and large, it's a good experience driving. The one difference that is sort of the most surprising to me is it's very rare that you get pulled over by a police officer here. Occasionally you will. Mainly what they do is they have radar cameras everywhere. And so what happened is every now and then, and I had one really bad month in December, you get, if I owned the car, you would get an SMS within 24 hours saying you're being fined this amount for this infraction, and then you can just pay it with a credit card, right? You don't need to go to court. You don't need to go this. Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to how many tickets you can get in a year, but it's a totally different process. For the most part, you just pay a fine and you're done with it. Depends. It depends how fast you're going. It depends where it is, and that affects the fine amount. Basically, there are speed limits here, but they give you a 20 kilometer per hour buffer. So whatever the posted speed limit is, everybody usually drives 20 kilometers more. But then if you go 21 kilometers more and you pass a radar camera, you get a ticket for the full difference between the actual posted speed and whatever you were doing. So one of the more impressive things here has been the level of automation and SMS integration. Like, when I pay for anything with my debit or credit card, I immediately get an SMS with the purchase information and the current balance in my account. Many things here are anchored. Almost everything here is anchored to your mobile phone. Many of the government services, even you can even pay for parking with your mobile phone. So there's a lot of services here that, again, having been away from the U.S. for almost 2 years now, maybe some of these have filtered into daily life in the U.S. But
no,
I don't. So yeah,
we're still behind the curve.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the 20th century, still in the U.S. in large parts. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of things being so new here, is that they can kind of try these new things, or they can do new things. That because there's infrastructure, and there's been infrastructure in the U.S. in some places for 300-400 years, whatever it is, you're limited to what you can do. In a city like Boston, I mean, you have narrow little roads because they used to be made for horse and buggy. What are you going to do? You got to work around it. Like here, you can just do whatever you want because it's desert. You can just move an entire building or whatever if you have to do. So they have a lot more flexibility in that regard, but they're also very willing to embrace something different and to try something new and to take some kind of drastic step to sort of make a difference. And the current Sheikh of Dubai is really just has done amazing things in the period that he's been in charge here. Just really admirable changes, very future focused, very progressive, and a lot of that. Each of the 7 emirates here in the United Arab Emirates is a little bit different. They're basically like, states within the union. So they all fall under the same sort of what you would call a federal system. They don't exactly call it here. They don't call it that here, but each one is slightly unique. So Dubai is probably the most progressive and the most well-known of all of the emirates. Abu Dhabi is actually the seat of power. It's another emirate. It's a little bit more traditional, but Dubai-esque in essence of being progressive, being modern, and many of the other Emirates are still a little bit more relaxed and they're more traditional. It just depends, where you go and what you need. But Dubai and Abu Dhabi are the two bigger of the Emirates, and they're more similar to each other than in some ways they are to the other Emirates.
So it's been a very positive experience, it sounds like.
It really has. I mean, I got to tell you, the people here are amazing. They're really so nice and so kind and so welcoming. Many of my students have really welcomed me like a friend and brother in some cases. Two of my students are cousins. A lot of my students are cousins. Many people they're all related to each other here in some way, or even if it's somewhat distantly. And so one of my students was getting married this year, and one of my other students, who was his cousin, he basically took me to get a kandura, which is the traditional like white robe here, and then the gutra, which is the white, kind of not a hat, but the head covering.
Sure. Yeah.
And he took me to his own tailor, and he had me measured, and he helped me get it, and then I went to the wedding, and they really welcomed me into their culture, into their life, and it's been really a great experience. I've really gotten to know a lot of the students here. My university that I'm currently at, maybe more so than a lot of others, is very heavily populated by locals or Emirati, but a good portion, maybe 30% of the other students are from many other different countries. Many of them are other Arab countries, but I also have students. I had some students from France. Many of my students are actually U.S. citizens, or they're dual citizens. I have a lot of students. I think I counted once. I think I have students from 30 different countries here in my classes in Dubai. In total, in counting the students, international students I've had when I taught in the United States, I've taught students from 48 different countries in total.
That's awesome.
Now that in and of itself isn't necessarily a guarantee of diversity, but it really is. And honestly, one of my students last semester was one of the sheikhs from another emirate. So, and he was the nicest, most humble guy ever. In fact, half the time he wouldn't bring a pen to class, and I would always joke with him that I'm going to charge him to rent it. And he would laugh every time, And so it's been a really amazing experience to get to know people at various levels of the socioeconomic system here, to get to know people who are from the UAE and become friendly with them and be welcomed into their culture and into their families even, and to also get to know people from other surrounding countries, and to really understand the culture, for them to be so welcoming and so kind. And it's been really such a bizarre juxtaposition. We don't need to go into the details, but to all the craziness that's happening in the election cycle currently in the United States.
Right.
My experience here couldn't be more opposite from all the hyperbole and all the rhetoric that is spewed about the U.S.
You're kidding me.
I know it's crazy talk, but it's
Oh Lord, yeah, you're right, and I try my best not to make this show about that stuff, because really it's about entrepreneurs, business leaders, academics. We did start off the episode, and quite honestly, at this point, because our conversation has been so awesome, I have to say, and thank you, Matthew, for just being so informative that I'm probably going to break this up into 2 episodes
cool.
Because we're like at almost 2 hours and we're still going. But no, this is good. I'm very happy about it. So please, yeah, this is fantastic.
Excellent.
But so as people hear this, I'm going to be referring to the last episode, even though this is all done in one taping. When we talk about the political system, so what happened this last week, and I don't know how much I'm pretty sure the news probably spread about what happened in Orlando.
Right.
Where, a big mass tragedy. But the whole week for Orlando was just absolutely horrible. It started off with a reality show musician who was stalked and murdered after a show. Not even 24 hours later, the thing at the Pulse nightclub happened. And then very shortly after that, at Disney World, a little boy lost his life, due to an alligator attack. And it's been this crazy, horrible thing. And I think what has been, and I think I can share this sentiment with many people who I know, who listen to this show, who I know from Facebook, the threads have just been disappointing, where people are just not really showing. It's this debate on guns versus not guns, Democrats versus Republicans, conservative point of view versus Democratic point of view, and it's so refreshing to hear what you're saying, that and when it comes down to it, there are good people everywhere. And there are great people, welcoming people who please don't let the media paint this picture of what is, quite honestly, I mean, we joked earlier about link bait. Well, U.S. media is just a plethora of link bait.
Yeah, it really is.
They get paid by viewership, and so they churn viewership by making stories just so wildly. They're trying to attract viewers at the end of the day. They're trying to attract viewers so that they can sell advertisement and so that they can make money. So, don't let that guide your perspective on, the people in the world, because I've heard nothing but great things about the UAE and have not been there yet, but would love to be, to have that opportunity to see it, experience it. I mean, you're definitely getting an experience I think very few have had, and maybe even fewer have even considered taking.
Yeah, I agree, and I really try to make the most of that and try to be appreciative of that, even on days when I'm working really hard and working really long, and there are a lot of challenging days just for various reasons, but stepping outside of that, I mean, you could have challenging days anywhere, right? I mean, I try to be appreciative of where I am. I try to sort of be respectful of where I am. I try to sort of embrace the opportunities as they arise. And quite honestly, I kind of joke that it took me going 8,000 miles away from where I had been to really feel like I finally, I don't want to say find myself, but it kind of feels like that. Like I feel like I've come into my own here. I feel like I found a lot of opportunity. I feel like I'm somewhere where people will respect me. I mean, I joke actually, because the first thing I experienced when I got here and I went to the hotel the first night, it said, "Welcome, Dr. Matthew." And I thought, did I get a PhD from Emirates Airlines on the way? Like, what happened? And I was like, oh, I've been upgraded, now I'm a doctor. I don't even need to go get a PhD. Awesome. And I've sort of fought it for a while, but what I realized is all the students call all the professors doctor here. And it's a term of respect. And they don't wrap themselves up in the technicalities of that. I mean, within the academic system, there's more awareness of it, but
absolutely.
But students here are very, respectful. They're very kind. They're very engaging. Sometimes they require more effort or more time to put in to explain things that may have been my experience in other places, but there's a great desire in them to do good and to sort of be the next generation and to make a difference. And a lot of the students I have who aren't from here, a lot of my students are from Syria, and a lot of them are from places where it's not really a great place to be right now, and where it really isn't a great place to be right now.
Truly, yeah.
And I just admire them so much for trying, for being somewhere, to sort of extricating themselves from that, to really making an effort to sort of do something that could better their lives and that of their family. And, they're all just really working towards something. I mean, it's a different kind of academic experience. It's got its own kind of, style, I guess you could say. But at the end of the day, everybody is really working to improve themselves and to learn something new. And then some of the reasons for learning are more practical. I mean, some of them get literal benefits by getting degrees and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they all contribute. And what I have found is I developed a really good rapport with my students, and they request me to teach the classes. And I was joking with one. It's really been nice because I was joking with one because I had 5 classes last semester and 181 students, and I had 2 classes of slightly over 40, and it was a lot. But I was joking with one of my students after, and I said, God, it's been a lot of work. It's been a great class, but it's been so much work. And he says, oh, that's the price of being popular.
Yeah.
Because everyone wants to take my class, So, I try to balance the administrative headache with the sort of with the emotional reward that I get for having all of those students, you know.
Well, let me ask you this, and I want to two things that I absolutely have to ask you about before we wrap things up. Okay, so number one is I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your book. And
okay.
For folks who, you know, let me let you explain it. So, the book that you have, give us a little bit of insight on it.
Okay. Well, I was approached in November of 2013 when I was still living in California by a acquisition editor from my publisher called Pact Publishing, and I guess by some series of searching and exploring, they go out and seek authors to write books on topics that they are looking to write. So at the time I was working for a software company in Santa Barbara, California, and was actually helping them to set up an installation of edX. And I have had a lot of other experience with a lot of other learning management systems. So I was basically invited to write the book, and over a period of 18 months, which is about a year longer than they anticipated it would take, I was finally able to finish the book. So let me sort of put the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart, and back up a little bit and explain that the book itself is called edX E-Learning Course Development. And the book is written such that you can use it to design, develop, and deploy an interactive and informative course for the edX platform. For those who don't know, edX is the brainchild of Harvard and MIT, and it is their MOOC platform. And the MOOC platform are those that allow enrollment of 10, 20, 30, 100,000 students into a course. And basically, I approach this book from the standpoint of how I would approach a class that I had to design and manage. So basically, the book is designed in such a way that you could follow it from the start to the beginning. And basically, it walks you through the various steps from getting started to then planning your curriculum. It goes into how to produce and create videos. It talks about ways of designing exercises. Then it goes over how to integrate the curriculum and put it online and put everything together into the online system. And then I talk about administering your course, from all the details you need to just kind of make it work, and then how to facilitate the course. It's more of a best practices kind of approach. And then the last chapter, the 8th chapter, is about promoting your course. And so what I've tried to do is cover from sort of beginning to end how you would plan, produce, and promote your course. Because the interesting thing about edX is that there are a couple different ways that you can create courses on it. There is the main edX, and if you go to edX.org, that's where you can go and sign up for any number of classes. But they also have a version called Open edX, and Open edX is an open source version of their platform that entities, organizations, even individuals, if they know how, can install and run their own copy of, and have their own version of edX to use perhaps for corporate training. That's really a secondary market for edX, and primarily it would be served by the Open edX platform. And they also have some other options by which people can make courses available using the edX platform. But basically, the book is a tool that teachers and trainers can use to help them produce a course from scratch to completion, or to take existing curriculum and to convert it into curriculum that uses edX's platform to its benefit.
I see. So that's very interesting. So yeah, and there's just so if you're an instructor, you can put a course out there. You can charge for a course and maybe make a little money.
Yeah, I mean, typically the way they run is through the main edX platform. It goes through the university.
Got it.
So some of the details of those inner workings, I'm not entirely clear on. But I will tell you, one of the interesting things that has kind of come from this book, or at least kind of related to this book, is at the university that I'm currently at, the American University of the Emirates, two things. One, to connect back to our early conversation about AACSB, we are in the midst of working towards AACSB accreditation. It's definitely a long process, but we're in that process. And the other thing that started last fall is we are looking into ways by which we can become a member of edX and produce content or create courses that are available through the edX platform. So there are a couple of other universities or academic entities within the Middle East that have courses there currently. And what I was basically able to do is at the end of this month, I'm going to have a conversation with the business development vice president of edX and talk about how my current university can become a member of edX and produce courses so that they can be available to the general public. And then I'm also trying to find out a way to make my book available at a discount through edX, because I really think that the book can be a really useful tool to teachers and trainers who are in the midst of creating courses for edX, whether they are working with their university and producing a course for the main edX, or if they are creating training materials to be used within a large company that has multiple locations and they're deciding to use Open edX as the platform. The book could be helpful for them. And there are also some other ways by which edX can be used to deliver curriculum as well. And in all of those cases, the way that I approach this book, again, is from the standpoint of an actual user. And a lot of what I did is I worked from existing edX documentation that is written from a technical perspective, and it's written by technical people, and the raw information is there, but it's not really presented in a way that's easy to read, that's laid out in a way that's logical and chronological and sequential, and it's sort of like a data dump is really what it is. So what I did is I took all of this material that I could find, and I kind of conceptualized how would I create a course, or how have I created a course for any online system, and I kind of rearranged a lot of the content from the way that they had it set up, and I kind of mixed and matched and put it in a process, and I defined these 7 chapters, and then I plugged in the curriculum and the content from the existing documentation that made sense to those chapters. And basically I dug into edX. I took a ton of screenshots. I signed up for all kind of classes. They have a sandbox version of edX that you can explore with and experiment with if you're considering using it. So I was able to get into that sandbox version of it online and do a lot of experimentation and testing of ways of doing things. So it was a combination of sort of kind of academic research, but a lot of practical hands-on experimentation. And that in combination with my aforementioned clickbaity marketing style of writing.
Right.
One of the things I really tried to do in this book is to understand that it is essentially a technical manual, but I didn't want to sacrifice sort of creativity and readability just by making a just really bland and basic instructional manual. So a couple of things came into play. Going again back to my very first job out of my undergraduate year, I can directly link my experience learning how to write in a very instructional and a very clear kind of a way from that very job to how I was able to put together the instructions within the book. Because even within the existing edX documentation, it drove my OCD tech writer brain crazy sometimes, because one of the things that I learned in both my technical writing experience and also my marketing experience is to make every bullet point start with a verb. Right? Every bullet point, every numbered instruction shouldn't have some kind of explanation in front of it. You can follow an instruction with explanation, but every numbered instruction should be a verb. Do this, turn on this, click this, push this, copy that. Don't lead with some kind of extrapolation. that confuses people. And again, the structure and the context of how I tried to put all the instructions together, even if essentially it was the same steps that was laid out in the existing documentation, I tried to rewrite it in a way that was, again, very instructional and very clear and very procedural. Yeah. But at the same time, I tried to sandwich that in between some creative storytelling. So every chapter starts with some kind of anecdote, some kind of pop culture reference, maybe a quote from somebody famous. So every chapter starts in a kind of creative, kind of imaginative way where I try to kind of make a bigger point and then focus it in on what that chapter is about. And throughout the chapters, I've tried to sort of include thoughts and ideas from some other people. I had a former student contribute a part to the book. I had someone who I believe is a colleague of both of ours, Danny Babb. I had her contribute some elements to the book, especially in the final chapter, Promoting Your Course. So in the Promoting Your Course chapter, part of why I wrote that, and the information in that chapter is very specifically relevant to edX, and a good portion of the chapter is very specific to edX. But beyond edX, you can take a lot of the ideas and a lot of the insight in that chapter and really apply it to any online class. And why I did that was partially because of my background in marketing, but also because I know that a lot of times academics are really good at being academic, but they're not, that's what but it stops there and they don't really think past that. They just kind of have this field of dreams mentality. And actually, I referenced that movie at the start of this chapter, I believe, and I said, if you build it, they won't come. Right? Just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. You have to tell them it's there, And so what I tried to do is to try to sort of present some options and some best practices for people who typically just create the course and facilitate the course. Even if they're not the ones marketing the course, I wanted them to be aware of it. I wanted them to understand some of the ideas that they could suggest to the people who are marketing the course. Because one of the things I learned going back to my MBA program is to know what you're not good at, accept it, and then hire people who are good at those things. But at the same time, you should still have an awareness of what that function is and what those skills are, enough to know if they're doing a good job or if they're basically taking advantage of you. So the chapter is really useful if you, as a trainer or a teacher, are using it personally, and there are ways you can market your own course through your own social media, through some very sort of not easy to use but readily available resources. And you can also use it as a sort of checklist or a idea generator for you so that you can suggest those things to other people who might be marketing your courses or promoting them for you.
Wow. So that is really cool. I mean, sounds like a really good book, something for folks who are, using that edX platform, and it sounds like a really good, kind of pocket guide to help you develop courses and kind of further take your skill to, a new level or the next level, if you will. So let me ask you this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, most folks who, are putting their own stuff out there and, kind of being out amongst the public and utilizing things like social media to promote stuff like that. And I'm sure you, like many other faculty that I know, and myself, I mean, you're out there on LinkedIn and you're out there, really kind of making the best of social media to promote your own stuff and really kind of get your name out and the word circulated. So that's really cool. Well, there's one other thing I did want to ask you about before we wrap things up. Okay. Now, this is something you had briefly mentioned before we started on this interview, and I have to say I'm a little jealous. And that is you were an extra in Star Wars.
Not Star Wars, but Star Trek.
Star Trek. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. So, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking Star Wars, but yeah, that makes more sense. So, Star Trek, which, by the way, you're not going to lose any fan points from me because I'm a huge sci-fi kind of comic book fan myself. But, so tell me about this opportunity. I mean, how did it come about? And did you meet anyone? Do you have any lock of Jean-Luc Picard's hair or something, anything like that?
Well, I don't know if he even has a lock of his own hair. No. Actually, I'll back up. I do actually have a funny Patrick Stewart story that I'll tell you. Let me back up. I'll tell you that since you mentioned it. So when I was at UCSB, it was early December, and it was just before the holiday break, and a friend of mine from high school was down visiting, so it was the weekend. I think it was a Saturday, and I was giving him a tour of the campus. And the main hall there that is used for performances but also doubles as a lecture hall actually had a class in there. It seats 800 people. It's called Campbell Hall. And so we were wandering around campus, and I said, let me show you this really big classroom, this big concert hall. So we were at what would have been basically like the foot of the stage. We were down towards the end of it, and there was a side door, and it was open. So I said, let's come in here, and I'll show you, and we'll walk up and out the front door. So I opened the side door very quickly, thinking it's a Saturday, nobody's here. And the minute I opened the door, light floods into the room, and then my friend and I both noticed that Patrick Stewart is on the stage.
Oh wow!
And he's rehearsing for when he used to do a one-man act of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he still does it, but at the time he was doing it somewhat regularly. So he was rehearsing in Campbell Hall for a performance of it that I don't know when it was going to happen. But he basically looked at us and with a kind of, what are you doing in here? And so my friend and I said, let's just pretend everything's cool. So we just basically literally walked in front of him, like in front of the stage, and walked up the main aisle and just walked all the way out as if nothing had happened.
Oh my gosh. How funny.
So that's my Jean-Luc Picard story, but the funny thing, by the way, you mentioned Star Wars. Actually, all of a great percentage of the Force Awakens was actually filmed in Abu Dhabi.
Well, and that's why I got it confused, because I'm thinking, yeah. So Jakku is actually Abu Dhabi. All right.
So I told my kids when we were watching the movie together, I said I live on Jakku, or I live near it, and they're like, oh,
it's just down the street. Well,
yeah,
and here I actually live near the forest. What the heck is the name of that planet where the Ewoks are?
Oh, Endor.
Yeah, Endor. Yeah. So we're not too far from Endor here.
That's awesome. So Star Trek came about quite by accident, really. You were mentioning social media a bit ago, and I am very heavily active. I'm really active on Twitter. I have a Facebook page. I blog. Unfortunately, my real job and my day-to-day responsibilities get in the way of all my social media activity. I don't know, it's crazy. But I'm very heavily invested in social media. So one day I was on Facebook, and I follow all the various news outlets here, and there was some mention in one of them of, this is in August of last year. It was in either August or I think it was July, saying that in early August there'll be auditions to be an extra for Star Trek. And I thought, what the heck? And I remember making note of it, and there were 2 days of auditions, and I didn't really know what to expect. And actually, where I live, is very close to where all the studios are. There's a huge amount of film production that's going on out here, and it's a growing industry. And really, very close to where I live is where all the studios are. So it wasn't really an audition. It was really just more of a cattle call, I guess you could say. And basically what we did is we all went to this one place. I think in total there were about maybe 2,000 people audition, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people audition. I think they cast about 800 or 1,000 people. And it was a pretty long process. I remember it taking somewhere between 3 and 5 hours. And we didn't actually audition. We just were waiting to get measured and photographed. That's all it was. Because what they were trying to do is match our dimensions with existing costumes. And I didn't hear from them. This is August 13th or 14th or something like that of last year. I auditioned, and they were filming kind of the week of October. Well, I filmed on October 15th, which was the last day of filming, and they were filming that entire week, the preceding week, in a few different parts of Dubai. And I didn't hear anything till it was a week before that. It was October 6th or something like that. I was literally in class lecturing, and I got an SMS on my phone. and it was, "Hi, this is Angela from." They used the code word. I forget what it was for the production. It escapes me at the moment with the production name for it, but the one that everybody knew what it meant. So, "This is Angela from so and so. We'd like you to come in for a costume fitting." And I said, "What?" Like I got no other notification. I thought for sure they just passed over me, nothing, matched, whatever. I was sort of like, okay, it's not going to happen. And literally, I was standing in the middle of the class, and my phone went off, and I looked at it, and I kind of had this grin on my face, and all my students were like, "What?" And I said, "I don't think I could technically tell you this, but I think I'm going to be an extra in the movie."
Oh, nice.
And so they got the kind of experience that they're like, "Ooh," they're so
that is cool.
So I got this text, and then I went the next day. It was my day off. So I went back to the same place where I had auditioned, and then they initially – I still can't give too many details about it because, they have you sign an NDA, but I think we're about 6 weeks away from the movie coming out, so I don't think anything tragic is going to happen. But so they originally had me in mind for a certain costume where I would have been, I think, like a janitor, but I would have had this like alien head kind of a thing.
Right.
And so I went there, and what they had to do first was they had to fit me with like I forget what they call it, like a headpiece, basically, that they put this one thing on your head, and then the actual prosthetic head rests on that thing. It's kind of like a hat you wear, and then the thing goes on the hat, right? It kind of like it balances the weight.
Right.
But they put that first device on my head. It was too tight. And so they said, "You can't wear this because, you could be on set for like 12 plus hours, and you're going to have like a migraine, by the time, you're an hour in if you have this thing on your head." And so I was like, "Well, what else can I do? I'll wear anything." I was like,
right.
I'll wear anything. Meanwhile, I'm in the midst of all of these costumes, and I'm like just dozens of like alien heads and costumes, and like every nerd's total fantasy,
that
right?
Is so
like
cool. I'm jealous over here just hearing about it.
And I'm like walking, I see all like the red, yellow, blue costumes. I see all the various, they have these amazing fabrics for just even regular costumes, like suits for people. They were made out of these like fabrics that I can't even explain. And then in some cases they were like Kiss boots, literally. Like I saw the boxes, they were like Kiss boots, like the band.
Yeah.
Just all kind of crazy costumes. And eventually they found another outfit for me, thankfully. I had to make some adjustments to it, but not too much. And I won't go into too many details, but it was a unique costume. In theory, the way the costume was designed, you're not supposed to see my face because it's sort of like one part of the clothing is supposed to kind of like a turtleneck almost go over my face.
Sure.
But the one distinct thing is that there was only one other person in my costume once we started filming, but I got to do all the digital capture. So what happened is, they fitted me for the costume, and basically everything was set, and then so they said, okay, you're going to be filming on one day, and by good fortune, it was actually a regular work day, but it was some kind of a holiday here, and I forget which one it was. So actually, I had the day off. And I showed up at 11 o'clock in the morning at the Medan race course, which is where the big horse races happen here. And I arrived there at 11 o'clock on October 15th. And by the time I left there, it was 5 in the morning on Friday.
Wow.
So I was there a long time.
I would say.
Yeah. So it was definitely a exhausting process, but it was also exhilarating. It was a combination of things, and without getting into too much detail, the first thing I did is they had me get in the costume, and then they had me in my costume. I went to one room and they did a bunch of still photography. They had me on this like pivoting, like not table, like a pivoting platform, and they would rotate me a couple of degrees every time, take a picture, rotate picture, and then they would have me do various poses in the costume, right, taking the pictures, and then they had me do something where they put me on another platform and they spun me around like continuously, did like a video capture. And so what that was for is all of those captures, they could basically copy paste my character and put it anywhere, right? So I don't know what they're going to ultimately do with the character, but even though there's only one of me at the time doing the digital capture, they do all of it so that if they need more of me for whatever reason, I don't know what the script calls for, they just digitally copy paste me. And then I went outside and we did green screen work, which is pretty cool. So I walked between these two huge Belgian guys And they were like easily like 6'2", both of them, and I'm about 5'9". And the tricky part with my costume is I didn't have like a headpiece, like you see a lot of these sort of like alien-looking heads and things like that. My face was just covered. Again, it was kind of like a turtleneck of sorts, but I literally had a teeny sliver of about like maybe like 1 inch by 1/4 of an inch that I could see through the knitting on the outfit. And somehow, fortunately, I was able to walk between these two guys, and then we were supposed to stop. The two of them paired off and walked back separately, and then I had to wait a couple seconds and then turn around and walk back by myself. Somehow, even though I couldn't see almost anything, I didn't walk into them. I didn't walk into a wall. I didn't trip on myself, and it actually worked. So I don't know what will happen with that green screen scene. I don't know what it's for. I don't know. But between the digital capture and the green screen, there was plenty of me to go around. There could be plenty of me to go around. So that was the first maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, something like that. And then the remaining time, it wound up being, I think 17 hours total I was like in costume or on the set. And for about 12 of those hours, I was in the costume.
That is crazy.
It was a lot of time. It wasn't continuous work, but it was basically walk from here to there, walk from there to here, walk back from here to there, walk from over there to over here. And the sort of the scene in being as vague as possible, the scene was kind of like a spaceport, so there was just a lot of people hustle and bustle kind of a thing, right? So they were just filming all kind of different angles, all kind of different scenes. But the coolest part was a couple of funny things. They had one other person in the same outfit as me, and actually they brought him on literally at the last minute because his son was an extra, and his son had been cast as a Vulcan. So his son was 8 or 10 years old and was also around the set, and he had the ears and stuff. So he literally was just there, and he happened to fit the costume. So him and I were paired. So we had the same outfit, and we may or may not have had 4 arms each, allegedly.
How funny.
But the interesting thing is when he and I were on set, he didn't kind of like button up the costume so his face was showing. And so nobody told him to button it up. So I said, I'm not going to button mine up either, so at least we'll look the same. So basically for those 12 hours of us being on set, in theory, unless they digitally cover our face, which maybe, to improve ticket sales, they will. No, I'm just kidding.
You may actually get seen.
I may actually be on camera. The cool part was in many of the scenes that we were filming, we were either walking in front of, behind, or adjacent to either Captain Kirk or Spock.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, so the funny thing is every time we would get past them before they yelled cut, we would like high eight each other. We used to joke, like we would take all of our hands and like try to like high five, because we figured the more times that we are walking, the more times we're in the frame, the more chance we have of actually being in the scene.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
No,
so
that's awesome.
I don't know what'll come of it. I could be in for 2 seconds. I could be in for 2 minutes. I could see hundreds of me copy paste in the background. I don't really know what to expect. I mean, I really don't. But I did get to meet Simon Pegg. That was pretty cool.
Fantastic. Love him.
He was super nice, and I had seen he had basically a romantic comedy in the theaters at that time, and the movie was called Man Up, and I had seen it with a friend. And I don't really like romantic comedies, but I love Simon Pegg movies.
Right.
And it was a great movie. Like it was typical kind of Simon Pegg with a little bit more like a little bit like a hint of The Notebook snuck in there, but still Simon Pegg. And so when he finished his filming, because basically the day that I was filming was the last day of filming for the whole movie. So as people would finish their scene, as the leads would finish their scene, we would have like a kind of a celebration, or kind of like people would clap.
That's
We'd
cool.
get around.
You got to be in a part of all that.
Yeah, so it's kind of neat. So I made sure to kind of like, weasel my way in close enough, and I just shook his hand and I said, I kind of did the typical kind of goofy fan thing, but hopefully wasn't too much of a goof.
Right.
But, I just said, I really enjoy your movies. I just saw your current one. And he actually co-wrote the script too for the Star Trek movie.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
That is
so. he was really gracious and really nice, and again, it's a long day for all of them. Like I'll be honest with you, like it's a glamorous ending, but the process of making a movie is very grueling. You hear that a lot, but I didn't really realize it till I experienced it. But it is true; it's a lot of physical work, even if you're just walking back and forth. I mean, my feet at the end of the day were just a mess. I wore tennis shoes for a week to work.
Yeah, you were just there for that one moment too, and the people who do pre and post. Wow, they're still at it.
Yeah, I mean, and there were so many people there, so many extras, and many people were in really complicated costumes. And in between takes, they would either take off part of it. Many of the more complicated costumes had basically air conditioning or cooling devices built into them.
Wow. Where
they had like tubing, and then whenever we stopped filming, someone would come up with the device and hook it up so they could get some cooling inside of them. Or they would take the hat off, and like gallons of sweat would come out of it. They had people on set whose whole job was to like dab us. You know what I mean? Like if we were like sweating, they would come over with a towel and dab us. And at one point, the best thing ever, I was standing there and I feel this cool sensation down my neck. And I thought, oh my God, that's the best thing ever, because I was basically broiling for 12 hours in my costume. Is basically what it was. I was like on a slow broil. So anything that was remotely cool or cooling was welcome. And so it was. I turned on and I asked the PA, I said, well, what was that? That felt so cool. She said, shaving cream.
Nice. Nice.
So that helped. So they were very attentive to us. They were very helpful. There was always plenty of food around. There was always there was a big waiting room where people just waited. I thought for sure they'd be showing Star Trek movies. They didn't. The worst part was we couldn't have our phones for that entire time because they were so afraid of pictures leaking that we couldn't have our phones at all. So we just had to be like, old school. It was like the 1800s, and we had to just, oh my God, talk to each other.
That's funny. That's funny. Well,
so amidst this movie of a highly technical future world, the actual, process of making it was very futuristic. But the good thing was I got to know a lot of really cool people. I've made a couple of really good friends from the group of people who I was an extra with, and one of those individuals were actually working on a project currently for the Ministry of Happiness here. So there's actually a Ministry of Happiness here, and we have devised some kind of initiative that we're still in the midst of working on, but that might be a cool thing. We actually had a meeting about a month ago at the Prime Minister's office. So
neat.
That was a pretty cool thing to do. So all that came from Star Trek.
Well, that is awesome. Matthew, I have to say, man, thank you. We went a while, but this has been a fantastic. I mean, you've given me a lot, and I will say right now, I definitely want to keep this going, in that I'd love to have you back and talk more about everything from your hijinks of how you find yourself in these precarious situations to the stuff that you're doing overseas. I think the work and just that insight. I mean, honestly, I could go longer, but unfortunately, I do have to kind of cut it at this point. But man, it has been fantastic having you on. If you're open to it and you don't have anything going on, would love to have you back again.
No, I welcome that. This was really fun. I really enjoyed chatting with you. It's amazing all the coincidences and the similarities we have in our lives, and that makes for an interesting dynamic, if nothing else. So yeah,
absolutely. But well, I'm going to close it out, and let everybody know. Thank you for this special. We'll just say at this point, this special two-part episode of the Satisfactionist Podcast. I don't think we're going to fit this all into one, but thank you everybody for joining us and for tuning in. Once again, we encourage you to support the show by going on to Satisfactionist Podcast or satisfactionist.com, clicking on the cast link. And there are lots of ways that you can help out the show. You can help out the show by donating directly. You can subscribe for as little as $2 a month for all of this awesome content. You can click on a link if you need business cards. If you need next time you're headed to the airport, you need a discount on parking. If you need to buy something on Amazon, check us out. Do your transactions through us. All of it just puts a little bit into our piggy bank that allows us to do some better, more amazing and awesome content. Not to say that I always say that, and then I feel like, oh, what are you saying? Your current guests aren't awesome? No, but what it will allow me to do is to buy even better gear and really kind of improve the back end and production value, I think, of the show. So, well, Matthew, thank you once again so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure to have you on. We will definitely be back with more episodes. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning into the Satisfactionist Podcast with your host, Professor Ben, and class is dismissed.